Welcome to the Tree Council of Ireland's latest podcast. Today we have Aubrey Fennell, who has been the main force behind the Tree Register of Ireland, where we have the registry of all the most significant, biggest, and tallest trees in the country. Last year, Aubrey started to update a project which originally started in 2000 or thereabouts. There's about 12,000 trees on the register now, but obviously with wind blow and growth and time passing, it gets out of date. So Aubrey is now adding new trees and is updating existing trees. With us today also is Amy Lona, former president of the Tree Council of Ireland and well-known expert on all matters environmental, trees, and everything else. So myself and Aina will be asking Aubrey some questions as he goes through his presentation. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Aubrey, who's going to show us a selection of some of the most interesting trees he's come across in his review.
This is Aubrey here, and I to give you an introduction as to the tree register, which was started in about 1999. And as Brendan mentioned, maybe about 14,000 trees are now on the register. And of course, it's now 25 years since many of those trees have been last measured, and they're measured for their height, for their girth. And then in 2009, heritage trees were also added. Heritage trees which didn't meet the requirements of height and girth and so on, but for their story, that there's a story about them, that they're unusual, that they're associated with places and with people. And so we have trees, another couple of thousand of those trees were added in around then, and a book was subsequently written about those trees in 2013. So over the years now we're getting to the stage where we need to return to those trees that we first measured back so far long ago, and to see how they're doing, if they're still there, and which is what in 2024 we had a big push, and we recorded 3,000 trees to update those records and to add more new ones as we come on. Trees planted in the 1990s are now getting quite big. So people ask me, when is the best time to plant a tree? And I always say 35, 40 years ago, because you don't have to wait a lifetime to see how trees can become such an important element of our landscape. So in order to, what we're looking for, we have in front of me, we have the coordinates of the tree, in other words, where the tree is found. And now we have, technology has really moved on even since 1999, now that we can now record trees and with GPS, and we can fix their position to within literally centimeters of where they are. And so that it maybe a couple of 100 years time, someone might come back and they will go to the exact spot where that tree is. If it's still there or if it's gone, at least we'll know exactly which tree was where. And so what we're looking for, the details of the tree, we're looking for the time it was measured, the species of the tree, the common name of the tree, if we have a date when it was planted. Layers of information, which is all makes each tree that we measure, and to repeat measure as to see how it does, and to add layers of information, which is very important in the future.
How do you decide in the first place that you want to measure a tree? Are you driving down the road and you see a big tree on the horizon? How do you get access to the tree?
Okay.
How do you decide in the first place, I'm going to measure this tree and not that one?
Yeah, well, first of all, what we initially started before 1999, when the tree register was set up, with the tree register of the British Isles, which is set up by Alan Mitchell. Alan Mitchell was a very famous dendrologist from Britain who actually went to forestry school in Trinity after the Second World War. He had a great affinity for Ireland and included Ireland in the tree measuring. So there are a few thousand trees that he measured in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And so initially our first job was to visit the places that he visited, and he visited the large estates, about 70 or 80 estates around the country with tree collections. And so that was a good starting point for us to see how those trees are and to measure them again. So and the other trees we're looking for are trees that were recorded back in by H.M. Fitzpatrick, another forester who measured trees back in the 1930s. And trees were also measured by Ells and Henry, for the trees of Britain and Ireland back in the early years of 1900s, and going back to all the way back to Samuel Hayes, who measured trees, who was where Avondale lived and where Avondale is, and he was a MP for Wicklow back in the 1780s and 90s, and a great tree planter, and he wrote about trees. And I have refound about 20 or 30 trees that he measured back in Leinster back in 1790s. So those trees, and then, of course, with that, whenever I came across a tree for its height, if it was unusual, if it was, for example, if it was an elm tree, which in 1999 there were still a few of them knocking around, it was important to record those trees because they were disappearing fast. In the same way that it's now important for me to be looking for ash trees before they're gone, and another part of our heritage disappears. And so and then people with publicity through the press, through television and radio, we managed to get the word out, people to contact the Tree Council. And so I follow up all the contacts we've had over the years, and I follow up and visit people. And then I just drive by. I've got the binoculars at the ready, and if I see something interesting, I have a hard neck. I go up driveways, because most trees in Ireland are in private hands. So I've hardly ever been refused entry, and so although it's getting more difficult as time goes by with electronic gates and so on, but as soon as I drive by a place and I see something that looks good, whether it's a tall tree, there are signature trees on each property. There could be a redwood, or it could be a silver fir. Silver firs were planted in the 1800s, and they're now huge trees. They're like they're an indicator species that there's something interesting there. So just by chance, I might find something, and I drive a different road all the time. So getting lost for me is actually finding new places to visit. And so with that, there's so much, there's a lifetime's work and lifetime, and for people in the future, there are trees still to be found. And even this in 2024, I found one of the largest oaks in the country, and it was only 10 miles from where I live, and I never knew about it. And so anything is possible. There are trees out there still to be discovered.
You're planting trees yourself, Aubrey?
I am, and like I said before, it's people ask me when's the best time, and I started when I was a teenager, typically actually in primary school, when we were asked to plant horse chestnut conkers into pots. And I planted one in a pot when I was about 10 years of age. And then about 3 years later, when I was 13, I planted it out, and it stands on the avenue, and it's now a big tree. So I started, and this tree that we're looking at was one that I collected as an acorn in 1992 from Germany, and I planted it in a pot and planted it out in 1994. And it's now, as you can see, it's getting on for 20 meters high and 2.2 meters in girth. So the one in Ireland of Quercus rubra, red oak, is a 4.5 meters in girth. So,
Aubrey, if you planted it in 1994, why have you got estimated age 0 to 50?
Well, that is everything. I have a data logger, so everything, and I scroll down the data logger. I enter the information. I'm asked a question, approximate age or of the tree, even though I have a planting date. So that I have to fill in the box, otherwise, so that's why you have it might seem repetitive information. Another is a turkey oak that I planted in 1998, and similar again. It's now a fine tree. I planted it after the storm of '97, when a Christmas Eve storm, and when probably the worst storm in my lifetime was that Christmas Eve storm in 1997, and it was an opportunity again. Storms, and we've just come through a winter of storms, and it's an opportunity to plant, and space is being created. So it's not all doom and gloom when it comes to when trees are falling all over the place. It makes us reevaluate our landscape, and we're seeing, well, maybe there's an opportunity, there's a gap there, we can plant it, and trees don't live forever. They can live enormous amount of time, but also considers as an opportunity to plant trees for the future. And so this is an example. A big tree fell down, I replaced it with this, and now 25 years later, it's hard to remember that there was a previous tree at this spot. John F. Kennedy Arboretum is probably, and is started in the late 60s, early 70s, and is probably, and has now become, and will become, the most important collection of trees in Ireland, and one of the most important in Europe. To have three trees of each species were planted, and eventually it might be reduced to one. So, but we have several thousand species of trees, and they're now getting to a size and an age and of importance, that's of national importance. So we're not just looking for old trees, we're looking for trees which are unusual. So Quercus falcata, southern red oak, is a rare oak tree. And same again, we have another oak, Quercus macrantera, the Caucasian oak, probably the most, in my mind, the royal oak. It's the most magnificent tree. Very few are in Ireland, and it's a tree that should be planted more regularly. And there might be, down the road, there might be a possibility that something might happen to our native oak trees, and we'll have to consider other species, so that we have diversity, and this would be a candidate.
Can I ask you, do you think in Ireland you could plant any tree? I mean, we're a great country for growing trees. We don't freeze them. We have enough rain and all. So that from any part of the world, would trees do well here? Or are there some trees for which Ireland is not suitable?
Well, obviously there are many tropical trees, but there are many trees subtropical, from the Mediterranean, from the Canary Islands, from Australia and Chile and New Zealand, trees which cannot, which frost, they're very frost tender. But we have parts of the country where which never gets a frost. For example, off the southwest coast of Kerry and Cork and places like that on the coastline, and there are fantastic island gardens down there which are growing trees which you have to go to the Mediterranean before you could consider growing them. That's how mild that things are down there. It's like the Gulf Stream is like the storage heater, and it keeps things temperate for trees. So yes, we can even we won't be able to grow baobab trees in Ireland, but we can grow date palms. And we do have a huge range of potential trees that can be grown here and grow quite well. What limits Irish trees probably more than anything is the lack of summer temperature, where they don't thrive simply because our summer temperatures are not hot enough, and they don't harden the wood over the course, so that they become rather brittle. And the other thing is that they suffer from from their feet being very wet, shall we say, the roots. That's the other thing that kind of prevents some trees from thriving. But generally, we can grow more species here than almost anywhere else.
Isn't that a problem, the lack of summer heat? I mean, common trees like the Spanish chestnut rarely produce, seeds that will germinate. And there's lots of other species like that, even though they'll thrive vegetatively and they grow very well.
Exactly, you're right there, and so things like walnuts and trees like sweet chestnut mightn't produce the fruit that, but they still produce trees that are happy here, and so it shouldn't stop us from trying. And with the way climate changes, with hotter summers, there will come a time when those trees will be able to produce wood. I mean, probably in 100 years' time, there'll be vineyards growing in County Carlow.
Nice.
Well, I suppose an example of that is the Macrocarpa, which was the Lelandia of its day. It's now, certainly on the East Coast, it's now producing offspring, whereas, when I was a kid, you couldn't produce any Macrocarpa from seeds.
Yeah, that's true. And I'll give you a good example of a Mediterranean tree which is doing that now, and it wasn't doing it when I was growing up, and that is the bay laurel. Which used for cooking and so on, and they are native of the Mediterranean, and they producing countless seedlings now. I have them here, and other things like we've had evergreen oaks for hundreds of years when they were first introduced, and they're getting very profuse in their number of seedlings, and they're becoming trees that are becoming more naturalized just because of increased summer temperatures. And it's summer temperatures which is what's making the difference there, making them viable.
So is Castle is another of these big landed estates. So has it a great history? I see a slide.
It has, and Burr is one of the coldest spots in Ireland, so it's an appropriate name. So if trees can grow in Burr, they can grow anywhere in Ireland, and it has one of the five great collections. If I were to suggest, it is one of the most important places in Ireland for growing trees, and as we saw there, a Portuguese oak, which is quite happy here. And the tree we're looking at now, Quercus cirrus, Turkey oak, another Mediterranean species, thriving. And in fact, I measured in September, I measured a Turkey oak down in very close to Enniscorthy in County Wexford. I've known about this tree for some time, but it's when I first measured it, it was about 7.5 meters in girth. That's only 25 years ago. It's now over 9 meters in girth. And so that just shows the increase in rate. In fact, it's now become almost the biggest oak tree in Ireland of any oak species, bigger than our native species. And yet it's only about 150 years old. As we see in front of us, this is an oak, a Turkey oak at Burr Castle, but they make magnificent trees to admire rather than the timber is not very useful. So that was one of the big surprises of last year, was how big and how fast growing these Turkey oaks are growing, bigger than any that are found in the Mediterranean itself. So we're now growing their trees bigger than they can grow themselves, which is the same with Monterey cypress. Monterey cypress is a tree which is found only in a small area right along the coast, about 100 miles south of San Francisco. And it got stuck there because trees, after the ice ages, trees had retreated during the ice ages southwards in North America and in Europe and in Asia. The ones in North America, because the mountains run north to south, ranges. They were free to go down into Mexico and hang out there for a few thousand years until the climate changed back again, and they were able to return up, move up northwards to their climatic zone, which they were their happiest. Except the Monterey cypress ended up in a cul-de-sac because it ended up on the coast with no mountains like the Sierra Nevada to use to go up even further north into Canada, where they would have been even happier. And that's why they were just found struggling on the coast there in the Monterey Bay, and until they were discovered and spread, and they found a really good home in Ireland. So in fact, our biggest trees of all are in Ireland, even though they're less than 150 years old, are Monterey cypresses. There are some now up to 14 meters in girth, which is extraordinary.
Aubrey, when you say the biggest tree, do you actually mean the greatest amount of
Fattest
you
tree,
weighed
shall we
it?
say.
So you're not talking about the height particularly, you're talking about
Not to height, the volume of timber,
yeah.
and the girth of its trunk. So that's, and they grow faster. But anything that grows so fast is also very vulnerable to wind throw and things like that. So
What is the biggest tree in Ireland, Aubrey, in terms of not height now, but in terms of sheer volume?
Sheer volume, I would say there's a sequoia, or a Wellingtonia, as some people call it, not in these parts, but sequoia, or the giant redwood of California. The biggest one in Ireland in terms of volume of timber is probably one in Powerscourt, and it's down by the river Dargle, and it's the largest in a line of about 30, and it's it's over 10 meters in girth and over 40 meters high, and combined it has a volume, a cubic of tons. If it was cut down and cut up, it would produce about 95 to 105 tons, and that would make it the biggest in terms of volume of timber in Ireland. Now, the biggest in Europe is a plane tree in near Dubrovnik in Croatia, which is about 160 tons cubic meters. And the biggest one in the world is General Sherman, which is another sequoia, except this one is in California and is the biggest of the biggest, and that's about 1,600 tons and over 2,000 years old. And it's over 30 meters in girth, to give you an indication of how big they could ultimately get. And maybe in Ireland in 1,000 years' time, if with a bit of luck, some of our redwoods might reach such size. Who knows?
I know that the tallest trees in Ireland are basically Sitka spruces. What's the tallest tree in Europe at the moment?
At the moment, the tallest tree in Europe, well, about 10 years ago, there were eucalyptus in Portugal of 74 meters, and in Spain of about 69 meters. Now, they have yet to be remeasured, and they are not a native species. And in the UK, in Snowdonia, there are now Douglas fir over 70 meters high, now measured. And I have one of the things that has changed since I first started measuring is that the device for measuring the height of trees used to be a hypsometer, a German device, and it's a mechanical sort of a device which measures angles. Now we have laser rangefinders, and I just show you one which is here. This is a laser rangefinder, which in 2016 I acquired, and that measures using laser beam, and that used properly can be as accurate as within millimeters, while the hypsometer have devices that we were using back before then could be out by up to 5%, 6%. So a tree which is 50 meters tall could be about 3 meters plus or minus what was measured. So now we have devices which is used by all tree measures, and so that we have across wherever country you're using, we all use the same device, so that we have they can be compared with each other, shall we say. So we're looking at the moment Glendalough, and this is the tallest tree in Ireland as things stand, which is just up above the waterfall, going up towards the what's the walk, the Spink. That's it, the Spink, and it's about a few hundred meters above the lake and going up to the Spink, and there is a grove of about maybe 50 trees, as you can see in the photograph, and the largest there is 62.3 meters girth or height, which in old money is about 207 feet high. Or if the next time you're walking on the quays and you look at Liberty Hall is 59 meters tall. So that gives you an idea of how tall Irish trees can get. And if you want to know how tall trees can get worldwide, the tallest trees in the world is a shade under the height of the spire in O'Connell Street, which is 120 meters high, and the tallest tree in the world is almost 117.
So that tree there, I mean, it's the tallest tree in Ireland, and it's less than 100 years old. How would that compare with how the same, in this case, Sitka again, how would that compare with its speed of growth, like in its natural environment in Northwest America? Like, does it grow that fast there?
Yeah, well, I've seen, I've visited Sequoia National Park, and I have seen cut away redwood forests. So we know that were cut down clear-felled in about the 1860s, 70s, 1870s. So we're talking about trees which are about 150 years old now, because this is secondary growth. And those trees are not as tall as the tallest of our trees that we've grown in the meantime. So actually, our trees are growing as fast, if not faster, than in their native habitat.
But Aubrey, is this good or bad? I mean, if that tree has grown to 62 meters in less than 100 years, is it stable? I mean, has it got roots to hold it in? Is it too
That's the
tall?
question. Yeah, that is a good question. And I would say, I know that typically trees that spend, like yew trees live to a fantastic age, several thousand years perhaps, and they grow very, very slowly. And the same goes for trees, the oldest trees in the world that we know of that have been core sampled up to almost 5,000 years old, which are junipers found in the White Mountains on the Nevada, Californian in that area, and they again only have about 60 because they're growing at high altitude. They only have about 60 days of growth per year, while here in Ireland, Sitka spruce can grow almost throughout the whole year. They never stop growing. So yes, the question is, well, with shelter, it's possible. Sitka spruce have back in their native, they are native to Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia, and they typically they have a shelf life of about 600 years. So and they were introduced in the 1820s, 1830s, I think. So we have trees that were initially planted back then, 200-year-old trees, and they're looking a bit worn, worse for wear. But actually, the tallest one of all is at Shelton Abbey in the Quilcha Forest, just beside the open prison down in County Wicklow, and it's still 59 meters high, and it was planted in about the 1830s, 1840s. So it's growing away, and it's very exposed, growing. It's got no company within 50 meters of it. So and yet it's still standing proud, and the top is looking good. So
I think Shelton Abbey had a bit of a problem with pollution back in the 70s, didn't it?
Yeah.
But Aubrey, do our trees then grow higher than the ones in Oregon, the same Sitka spruce? Do they go right up to that height, or are they taller there?
Okay, the Sitka spruce, the tallest Sitka spruce in British Columbia is a little around the 90 meters. So that's their ultimate height. Douglas fir ultimate height is about 100 meters. Coastal redwood, 115, 116, like I mentioned before. The reason why the coastal redwoods get so tall is because they're coastal redwoods for a reason. They're all within 5 kilometers of the coast, and California has typically in summertime has fog. In fact, they say the finest weather in San Francisco is to be found in wintertime because it can be completely covered in fog right along the coast. And that means that condensation from the fog allows trees to absorb moisture, not just up from the ground, but also from the top of the crown, and it can reach up and absorb the moisture requirements, so they can get to great heights. And it's shown also in the springs of Taranaki in New Zealand. You have the same effect where you have steam from the geysers reaching up into the crowns of a stand of coastal redwoods there, and they are now 75, 80 meters tall. So it just shows that, and we have a very exposed, we have a lot of exposure. So trees grow to great height when they have shelter, and most of our mountains are running east to west, and so Wicklow is the place to be because they tend to run from north to south. So you get these deep sheltered glens along by river courses like the Avoca and so on, and that allows them to reach up with competition with neighboring trees to great heights, and with not being felled by storms, or not as likely. So yeah, trees can have the ability to go to great heights. And as we see in Snowdonia, there are trees now over 70 meters tall there. So it's possible that in 10, 20 years time, some of these trees that we have in Ireland are going to get to similar heights. For example, measuring last year, I remeasured all the tall trees, and I found the trees growing best, fastest of all, are in Bownray, in the Slieve Blooms, and which are reaching up to 62 meters tall, and they were only 69 meters 10 years ago. So they are growing faster than anyone. So it's a bit of snakes and ladders. Some trees will reach their ultimate height, or have already reached their ultimate height and starting to die back. While other younger trees, because the ones in Bownray were planted in the 1920s, they are still growing fast. So they could potentially we don't know, could become the tallest trees in Ireland.
Isn't there a kind of physical limit to the actual height they can grow? Because I know I've heard that when you're talking about water transportation up around 80 to 100 meters,
yeah,
physically it's very complicated. You know, the normal capillary system that draws water up doesn't work at that sort of height, and there's I don't pretend to understand it, but there's some very advanced physics involved in how they get the water up to those heights.
So what's the question?
No, just saying, so I think that's what caps the trees at 100.
Okay, yeah, that's possible.
Yeah, but I would say, what was the trees you were talking about in the Slieve Bloom that were getting taller? What species are they?
Sitka spruce.
Yeah.
But Douglas fir and Sitka spruce, we have Douglas firs of several well over 60 meters in Avondale. In fact, 10 years ago, the tallest tree in Ireland was in Glendalough. Not in Glendalough, but in Powerscourt, and that was a Douglas fir, but it stopped at around 59 and a half. And I looked at it last year, and it stopped because it lost a bit of its top, and it's regrowing a new top. So it might be it might take off again. But certainly younger trees. There are other trees near Rathdrum which are only planted in the 1950s, which are 55 meters tall. So that's my lifetime.
So do you want people to make you aware of trees that are huge in their area that you mightn't have heard of, or send them into the Tree Council? Or do you reckon you have a handle on them all now, you know where everything is?
Well, for tall trees, the limitations, as I mentioned, are you need mountain ranges with running in the right direction so that you get added protection. So we kind of know where all the likely places are for tall trees. But for example, I think I've measured about 200 oak trees up 6 meters or more, and 6 meters or more is about 20 feet in girth. That's the size of an oak tree when it gets really majestic, and would indicate an age of 250 years plus. And I reckon I've found about maybe 200 in my life so far, and I reckon there could be still another 100 out there. I mean, like I said, like I mentioned before, that oak tree 10 miles away from me where I lived, and I never knew about it. It was only that I talked to a farmer who rented the land 30 years previously, who said, if the oak tree is still there, that must be the biggest one, and it's off the road. You'll never find it. You have to give me real directions, and there it was, still growing away, and one of the largest oak trees in the country. So if I do nothing else in my lifetime, I want to find all the other great oak trees of more than 6 meters in girth. And oak, they're an indicator species. They are a species of great age. They also harbor more wildlife than any other tree species. And Ireland, as we was absolutely lacking in old timber or forest. We've cut down most of them. 130 years ago, we were down to half of 1%. We're still not much more when it comes to native species. We've got lots of Sitka spruce, which we now have 11% forest cover, but there are still trees still to be discovered, hiding away from roads and whatnot. And I'm hoping to find them all, because really 200 oak trees of such size, you can find 200 oak trees of such size in one park at Windsor Great Park near London, which is crazy. I know it is exceptional, but we need to find them all. And because they are living monuments. And in fact, oak trees, the oldest oak tree in Ireland is Abbey Lakes, is about 600 years old. And if that's not a monument, I don't know what is. And it needs to be appreciated.
What's the oldest tree in Ireland, Aubrey? What's the oldest tree of any species in Ireland?
By my reckoning, the Silken Thomas yew is probably the best candidate, and that's found at Maynooth University in the grounds, the seminary, and that could be about 700 to 800 years old. There's quite a lot of evidence that and mentions down through the years that was the tree that Silken Thomas played his flute or whatever it was before going, and he goes back to the 15th century, and when he I stand corrected there actual date, but anyway, the evidence suggests that 700 years at least for that. But there are trees in the Burren, yew trees again, which are found on cliff faces at high altitude, which are not much thicker than my arm, but they've never been touched by man or beast because they're out of the way. And similar trees found in the Lake District have been recorded and core dated to be up to 1,000 years old. So in fact, the oldest trees in Ireland might only be mere shrubs.
Mightn't be huge at all. And it still is counting the rings in the trees, is that still the only way in this day and age of DNA analysis and everything else? Is that still the only way? And in places like the tropics where you don't have rings, how do they date the trees there? I mean, is there no more modern techniques than that?
I cannot answer. I do know that yews will hollow out, after 300-400 years old. So you're basically the earliest growth, there'll be nothing left of it. So I mean, and that's when it's most condensed. I mean, there's a yew tree near where I live which is completely hollowed out, but it's got an aerial root which has come down about 200 years ago, and an aerial root from about 2 meters up in the crown and came down, and it's forming a new trunk inside the old trunk. So it's an eternal tree. That's this tree is well over 500 years old. But to answer your question, as to dating trees, it is problematic.
I think, Aubrey, what they've done is they have found, if you like, old trees, trees of bogs, all the rest, and they've managed to create a pattern going back thousands of years. So even in your yew tree situation, they might look at the outer 50 rings, they'd match that to a pattern, if you like, the master database, and they'd be able to figure out roughly, working backwards.
Yeah, I mean, you could be right there, but of course the outer 50 years refers to the last 50 years, the most recent 50 years. What happened before that, if there's nothing left, maybe that's another question. But you can only go by remeasuring old trees, and for example, the Glencormac yew, which is probably almost the biggest yew in Ireland, which is almost 7 meters in girth, magnificent tree, and it's part of a line of yew trees at Glencormac, which is Avoca Handweavers near Bray, just off the N11, and that was measured mid 19th century, and it was at such and such a girth, and now then it was remeasured by H.M. Fitzpatrick in the 1930s. Then it was measured by me now, and there are other yew trees which recorded from back in the 18th century and being remeasured, and so you can see the growth rate. So this is all part of this is all bits of the jigsaw which can help to support the evidence that we can put together, as you mentioned, that we can make a pretty educated guess or an estimate as to a likely age of a tree.
I presume carbon dating works fine with trees too.
I'm sure it does, but we don't have ancient trees are generally all hollow again. So the first few hundred years, the evidence is gone.
Aubrey, you've been measuring trees all your life, and you've been finding new ones and old ones. Have you a very surprising tree? Have you a favorite tree? Have you some astounding tale to tell us about a tree you measured once? Or there must be some stories from your past of measuring trees.
I've had a number of, a lot of stories, because you do meet some people on the way. And Tipperary tends to be the place where strange things happen. Now, I've got nothing against people from Tipperary, but funny things happen there. I've been chased by a bull there in it. I've been threatened with a shotgun, because the farmer thought I wasn't measuring tree, I was doing some dumping. And I've since made up with that farmer and given him presentation of my book, and he now knows that I am genuine. And and also in Tipperary, let me think, maybe that's for another time. But my favorite tree, perhaps, it's one that I'm probably never going to get back to. It's so hard to get to, but it's in a place called Glasheen na Marv, and which is like the Garden of the Dead, and it's in Tork Mountain, I think it's a Purple Mountain on the side of it's in Killarney National Park. It's an alder tree, and it's at the highest limit of in Ireland, which is about 1,200 feet above sea level, where native trees can grow. And it's an alder, and it's an ancient alder. It might be only 150 years, but it looks ancient. It's in a wonderful spot. It takes about 3 hours to get in there, through so much rhododendrons. But you've got golden eagles overhead. You've got red deer.
Overhead.
Red deer, you can hear barking. It's just a magical place. It's just and that for me is the best thing about it's a voyage of discovery. You're just seeing Ireland and getting into corners of Ireland that are not looked at, and it's such a thrill to find something special in such an out of the way place. And I can't think of a better place.
Have you a new season starting now in 2025? Will you have to revamp after Storm Aon? Will things have been lost? So it's every year is different, onwards and upwards. So what are your plans for 2025?
Well, hopefully, I can do what I did last year. Last year I did 3,000 trees. It got a late start. It's a kind of new equipment, and we got about 3,000 trees. Hopefully, if everything works out, we'll record another 4,000 trees, and maybe 2/3 of them will be kind of remeasures of previous trees, and along the way pick up another 1,000 or two new ones never been looked at before. So that's my hope. In fact, if we were to remeasure all the trees that I've since got, it would take about another 3 years to revisit all the trees. So I've been concentrated in South Leinster up to now. So this coming year, hopefully we can visit Munster and North Leinster and some places in Ulster as well. I'm hoping to get around and get to, because the further away from where I live is the longest since I was last there. So it would be lovely to revisit such places.
Thank you very much for that, and hopefully your good work will continue. I know that there was huge interest in excerpts from your data set, for example, where every county you could know for any particular species what the tallest tree was and what the biggest tree was, and so on and so forth. So again, it's absolutely vital to update that so that we can know what trees perform well here, in what circumstances, given the whole climate change issue we have and everything else. So anyway, Aubrey, I'd like to thank you on behalf of the Tree Council for your wonderful work.
Yes, here. Well done.
Thank you. It's been such a pleasure. And to have your support, it means a lot. And you don't do this in isolation. So if you happen to watch this video, if you know of a tree, send on the details. Give a call to the Tree Council of Ireland. Have a look at the website, because on the Tree Council of Ireland's website, we have Heritage Trees of Ireland. That will show you with photographs. These were all trees that were recorded in 2009, about 1,000 of them. And I recommend that's a good place to start to what we're looking for. And hopefully we'll hear from you soon.